Hi everyone, welcome to your first video for our US1 class. So this is the first of many. Some will be from ones I recorded on another channel years previously, but most of them will be brand new. So as we start this course, we looked at the curriculum, me and the other teachers at our school teaching US1, and we noticed that it started with the when the colonies were under English control in the Americas. And we thought about that starting point ignores a lot that happened before that this land in America was English colonies. Now, the idea is that you learned about a lot of that already, but we wanted to do like a little refresher about what was happening before they became English colonies, and then also compare it to things going on in the world today. So that's the point of this video today. So the standard that the state of New Jersey says this video here is covering is assess the impact of the interactions and conflicts between Native groups and North American settlers. So it sort of covers that, but we'll get into that standard more as the unit goes on. So there's two main questions I want you to think about here. All right, so what happened in the Americas here before they were English colonies, and what is happening in the US now as it relates to this, at least anyway. So those are not the essential questions. I will in class tell you which video you can make this relate to which essential question. You can probably also figure that out on your own. So for this video, I'm going to read parts of a book called El Norte, The Epic and Forgotten Story of Hispanic North America. I read this not this past summer, but the summer before. It's by Carrie Gibson. This is her second book. She is a historian and a journalist. She's from America, but she's based out of the UK. She got her PhD in 2010 at the University of Cambridge in the UK, and writing about the Haitian Revolution. And she's also written about the Dominican Republic and a lot of the different Caribbean islands. So this is a good book to show you that, you know, we think of ourselves as like an English, right? We're English colonies, we're an English country. And of course, much of our political heritage comes from our background as being English colonies. But there were other cultures that influenced this land before the English. Obviously the French and the Dutch, but largely the Spanish, and of course the indigenous people that were here beforehand. So let's go back and think about what did we learn about freshman year. All right, so what do we need to remember from that year? I knew many of you back in S100 and the first floor of that year, right? What were we learning about? Well, first we learned about exploration, right? About people wanting to find new trade routes to go to the east. But by mistake, Columbus found the Americas, and then exploration was done by lots of explorers, lots of Spanish, but also Portuguese, some French, some Dutch, a little bit of English. And then ever since Columbus, right, we have the Columbian Exchange, where, as you reminded here in this image, that things came to the New World for the first time that were never there, and things went to the Old World for the first time that were never there. It's important to remember Old and New World, which is which, right? So the Old World was the world that they knew at the time, Africa, Asia, Europe, and the New World was the world that was new to them at the time, basically the Americas. So in this book, I just want to make a few references to what it says about the Columbian Exchange, because this review is important. So on page 20, talks about Hernando Cortez. You remember Cortez and the Aztecs? Remember he went to Tenochtitlan? It says, Cortez was also at the beginning of what would be a great biological exchange. He had no vocabulary for much of what he saw, and likewise, the Mexica were not yet familiar with the wheat, cattle, pigs, and horses the Spaniards brought from Europe, nor would they have names for the unfamiliar, invisible, and deadly microbes that accompanied the Spanish. So, you know, things like smallpox, right? Another thing it reference is the arrival of Columbus and his men showed the seeds of destruction for the indigenous way of life. Actually, this is for the in-community system, so hold on there for that. I'm looking ahead here. 20 and 21. Oh, page 72. I'm glad you're being so patient while I do this. I know you guys mostly watch this sped up anyway, right? Fast forward. So I sound like a chipmunk. Okay. Here we go. The Apache, in particular, one of the native groups, right, had proved adept at learning to use a tool introduced by the Spanish, the horse, which transformed them into an even more fearsome enemy. So remember that the natives didn't even have horses in their culture at all until the Spanish brought them over. Now, hopefully you also remember learning about the encomienda system. That's why I started reading about the destruction of the indigenous people there. So the encomienda system is important to remember because that was the labor system when the Spanish came to the Americas to have the indigenous people sort of labor for them. But that ended. Okay, so Columbus wanted to establish a colony and implement what became known as the encomienda. This entitled the leaders of a successful expedition who had been given a grant known as encomienderos the right to collect tribute from the vanquished. In the case of Hispaniola, the Hispaniola, remember, is the island which is Haiti in the Dominican Republic. This required making deals or using force to exact tribute from the indigenous chiefs, whom the Spanish called queques. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. So a little bit about what was that system like? How did it operate? And why didn't it last, right? Why didn't that system work? The laws aimed to phase out the encomienda when the title holder died and free any Indians on it. So this legislation was surprisingly not popular among encomienderos and triggered a revolt by a group of them in Peru. So the Spanish crown was starting to say, like, we don't know if we like this. So, hey, how about when you guys die, those people are then freed. It's not left to, like, your children or someone else. The Spanish crown started to think that this encomienda system was not very Christian. Remember, spreading Christianity was supposed to be one of the motivations of colonizing this new land. The Spanish had quickly learned that the Florida Indians communities were not suited for the encomienda system, in part because their villages often did not have enough people to use as labor force, nor did their social structure lend them to it. Overall, these were not tributary societies as the members of the Mexica Confederation had been. So the way, say, certain groups in what's now Mexico were set up, all in Central America and South America, even parts of North America, the indigenous didn't all follow that same social structure. So what worked for one group wasn't necessarily going to work for another group. So they were finding all these sort of flaws in the encomienda system. So we have now the Spanish crown not being so happy about the encomienda system, the Spanish themselves realizing, like, this is not going as smoothly as we thought. A number of factors were behind a rebellion. This is in Mexico City, including resentment of the encomienda system and a rejection of Christianity. So showing you also that oftentimes the native people were fighting against the encomienda system, another factor why it was not working. Now it talks about the Pueblo Indians. They handed out encomiendas and attempted to exact tribute, though the Pueblo Indians did not have these types of labor or taxation systems, and this quickly became the source of many disagreements. So basically, the encomienda system is not working. It eventually ends, and we know what then happens when the encomienda system phased out. Hopefully you remember that, unfortunately, that's when the transatlantic slave trade really started increasing and became permanent, and even started increasing as time went on. And, it's important to note, like, well, if they thought that encomienda system was bad because it's not Christian, how was the transatlantic slave trade Christian, right? So these are all different things to think about as we go through the different units this year. Also, with the Spanish in the Americas, note that some of it was just for trading and some was for colonizing. And the different colonial powers had different motivational factors. And that's something you want to think about when you think about the colonies in the Americas. All right, so just some quick facts. So who was the first to land in America from Europe, right? It was not Columbus, but Ponce de Leon. So in April of 1513, they were on the Atlantic side of Florida. Other things to keep in mind. Tenochtitlan was far larger than any European city. So as the Europeans came there, like what were they looking at? Were they looking who were they encountering, right? These weren't just people in huts that some people imagine, right? Some of these were very advanced societies. I also want to mention a name here of a Frenchman, Laudonnière. He was a French Huguenot, which means he was not Catholic. He actually fled to England because of the wars of religion in France, but he wrote A Notable History of Florida in 1586. And this showed images, they weren't photos, obviously, of Native American life for the first time to Europeans. So this relationship begins now to be more established, if you want to call it that. There are many conflicts with the Spaniards and the French in the Americas. There are many examples of forced coexistence, also examples of voluntary coexistence, and intermarriage between different cultures, both voluntary and non-voluntary, and all sorts of things. So, before we get into the British colonies, it's important to know of all these other cultures that were there. The Spaniards didn't just bring Catholicism. People were Muslim, people were Jewish. Many of them were forced to convert to Christianity when they were explored. But, you had all these different cultures and ideas coming to the Americas with them. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. And I want to show you about this map of significant potential. This is, beginning of August. Where could we have serious wildfires? So there was a lot going on in the news over the summer. Obviously COVID, obviously the election, obviously social injustice, but there was also wildfires that were occurring. So how can we relate those wildfires to this unit? Okay, so you may have seen images like this. Okay, if you are ever this close to a fire, please don't run with the bucket. Please run the other way. All right, but there's an article from just a week or so ago in the New York Times. Why does California have so many wildfires? And I'll share this article with you. That is Mr. Nichols. He's 84 years old, and he's there trying to stamp out fires in his backyard. All right, something to we probably can't comprehend here in New Jersey. So this article says there's four main reasons why there is these wildfires. First, we have changing climate, right? We all know about climate change and those factors. Secondly, people. Some of these fires start from, they mentioned like a big truck getting a flat tire and the rim hitting the highway and the sparks igniting fires, or down power lines caused by people starting fires. Also fire suppression, right? That actually constantly putting out fires actually causes more fires. So we're going to talk about that in a second. And then Santa Ana winds, a geological force of warm air blowing up from the south and helping to ignite these fires. So for those of you in New Jersey, you probably don't experience this as much in Passaic County. Some of you know already, I grew up in Ocean County, in the Pine Barrens on the Jersey Shore. And a common thing is that we would know about twice a year, and more some years than others, there would be intentional fires set off in the Pine Barrens. So like, like 1 week you might just smell a lot of smoke or see it in the distance. There were these controlled burns, and basically they would set certain sections on fire every so many years under control to prevent larger fires in the future. Now, the Lenni Lenape, who was the indigenous group of even up here in Passaic County, they were using these control burns in that area for over 1,000 years. Why did they do it? Well, they did it to travel, right? They would actually travel from up this part of the state down to the southern part of the state, basically in what's now like 206. But putting certain fires would make getting through it easier. They did it to improve hunting. They did it to get rid of certain insects, also to increase the supply of nuts and berries and even acorns that they would use for food. Now, it's also important to know that some pine cones rely on fire to release seeds. So in the Pine Barrens especially, those pine cones are so tight that if there was never a fire, there would never be new trees planted. So the Lenni Lenape did this, and as certain settlers, mostly the English and the Dutch, started coming into New Jersey, they said, oh, well, we should start this practice ourselves. So in the late 1600s, they carried this over. By the 1900s, it was still being done. In South Jersey, there's lots of cranberry bogs and blueberry growers, and they would do this to the woods around the bogs so that the fuel when it then used to be larger and actually burn what they need. Little fun fact: if you drink ocean spray cranberry juice, a lot of those cranberries come from New Jersey. So anyway, the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, actually began doing this then in 1928, and we've been doing it ever since. And where did we learn these tactics from? From the indigenous people, from the Lenni Lenape. So I share this with you because what about all these wildfires in California now? How did the indigenous people ever survive with all these wildfires? Now, granted, climate change would not have been the thing then. There weren't like power lines or trucks with rims sparking things, right? But like there were still Santa Ana winds, right? So why were they not affected by all these fires? Well, the truth is that there were indigenous people then who were doing controlled burns as part of not just for geological reasons, but also for part of their cultural, spiritual reasons. And they were, as settlers moved west, the indigenous people were then actually forbidden and even hurt or arrested for if they would do these controlled fires. And now people are sort of looking to them saying like, oh, well, maybe we could have learned something here. What do they suggest we do? So now they're going back to the indigenous people and being like, what should we do? How can these purposeful fires actually help us? So that's what we're going to be learning about. There's an article and a short clip, a podcast from NPR that you'll be listening to. And just pay attention and then try to draw connections to what you've been learning about in this video so far. Okay, so on class, I'll tell you what essential questions this can help you with for today, and any other questions you might have. All right, so talk to you then.